This is without a doubt the best whiskey I have tried in my entire life. Oh yeah, that whiskey I tried 2 years ago that I put on my Insta stories. Yeah, that was easily the best whiskey I've ever had. It smelled like It's not hard to remember the whiskies we love, but it is often very hard to remember exactly why we love them. And even more so difficult is try to describe to someone else why we love them. Which is to say, the further we get along in our whiskey journeys, all we're really trying to do is build a more reliable mental lexicon or database of drams up here. Whether we've tried them at a whiskey tasting, a training, an event, a festival, someone's house, a pub, a bar, a restaurant. So we can basically recall that whiskey later on to give someone a recommendation, whether we're working at a bar or just sending a message to a pal saying, here, you've got to try this whiskey I had a year ago. Especially if the last time you tried that absolute unicorn of a dram was 2 years ago at a whiskey festival, drinking it out of your own shoe no less. Then cut to present day and the multiple faded components of your memory are trying to paint a clear picture of exactly what you were experiencing at the time as you try and create a verbal recommendation for someone else as to why they should try that whiskey. Now, unfortunately for our memories, there are a few problems that trip us up when it comes to experiencing, banking, and then recalling a whiskey later on. So, firstly, the environment we're in when we're trying the whiskey affects our memory of the whiskey long term. Number two, certain parts of our memory that we use to store that whiskey are wholly unreliable and diminish over time. And lastly, number three, even if you can remember all of that, it's actually really hard unless you've had training or you're a writer, for example, to actually sit down and describe all the flavors, aromas, and sensations you get from trying a whiskey. And so basically what it comes down to is there's a distinct difference between a fond whiskey memory and an accurate one. I mean, for example, one of my favourite whiskey memories is drinking Glenfarclas 25-year-old out of a paper McDonald's cup in Cornwall. See, for neither love nor money, I could not tell you what exactly the aromas and the tasting notes of the whiskey at the time, mostly because it was 5 years ago, but the reason I really loved the whiskey was because I just finished walking 1,000 miles from John O'Groats to Land's End, and Craig Harper came and met me with that bottle, so it tasted very good. Cheers, Mr. Harper. And so for a lot of us, it's often the episode around the whiskey rather than the whiskey itself that we actually remember. And it's a lot like music and song recommendations if you think about it as well. When someone asks you for a recommendation for a tune, your mind starts filtering via years and episodes, festivals, parties, who you were with and what it reminds you of rather than often the song itself. And actually trying to describe why you love that song is actually near impossible without talking about everything around it. And it's a bit like that with whiskey recommendations too. Our mind goes back to a certain episode around the whiskey, so you're actually picking the things that happened, who you're with, what you were doing, the festival, the country, whatever it is, rather than actually being able to recommend the whiskey and all of its aromas and flavors and the price and the stories around it and so on. It's a bit like me recommending Glenfarclas 25-year-old and saying, if you drink this, you're going to look like Forrest Gump with a sweaty bandana sitting drinking this in a paper cup in Cornwall. So it really is a curious and abstract experience when you think about it, from experiencing the whiskey to actually trying to bank it in your memory and then recalling it sometime later with a modicum of accuracy for someone else. So first up, what the hell is happening between our senses and our brains to try and store the dram in our long-term memory to try and recall it many years later? The actual process, which is very IT sounding, is called encoding, storage, and retrieval. But we maybe have about a dozen different types of memory trying to work together to tell us long-term with different levels of reliability what exactly was happening in this glass and the room around us. So first up, when it comes to sight, you've got your iconic memory, which is basically your brain trying to remember what the color of the liquid was, what the color of the bottle label was, the shape of the bottle, who was in the room, what they were wearing, what color the walls were. All of this is actually really unreliable long term because our iconic memory is heavily biased emotionally and actually easily overwritten. And then you've got your echoic memory, aka all the sounds you hear in the room at the time. So it could be the voice of the host, the chatter of the guest, the cork popping out the whiskey bottle. All of this gives us a 7 out of 10 in recall reliability because sounds as a stimuli are much more stable long term than visual memories, aka this is why we're also good at remembering song lyrics. And then you've got your gustatory memory, which is everything to do with taste. So when you actually drink the whiskey, what's going to stay with you long term from that memory? Was it really super tannic and bitter? Was the ABV super high because it was a cask strength whiskey? This gives us about a 6 out of 10 in recall reliability because although it's vivid, it's actually not that accurate because there was so much going on at the time. And then we have our olfactory memory, which is all the aromas from the whiskey, from the room, your neighbour's aftershave or perfume. And although olfactory memory is really reliable long-term with about an 8 out of 10 of recall reliability, it's only the case if you have the stimuli present at the time. So if I smell that Glenfarclas 25-year-old now, I would be transported back in time. But if I don't have the whiskey present, your olfactory memory reliability is only about 2 out of 10. And then we've got our episodic memory, which is how you felt at the time of the tasting or before, during and after. So if it was absolutely peeing down with rain outside and freezing cold, then you got inside the pub and warmed up. And maybe as you're drinking the whiskey, you're obviously sober to start with and then go warm and then fuzzy afterwards as well. And long-term recall reliability is only about 4 out of 10 for this because much like our visual memories, the iconic memory, it is easily overwritten and emotionally biased. And then we've got something called procedural memory, which is basically us remembering how to do things. So for example, in a whiskey tasting, how to lift up a glass, how to bring it to your nose, how to walk to the bathroom. This is stuff which is based on repetition and things that we've all been doing since we were kids. Okay, maybe not the whiskey tasting part, but things like walking and running is a 9 out of 10 in recall reliability. And then you've got something called kinesthetic memory, which is almost like spatial awareness. So understanding the space between this glass and the mic and my face and my mouth. And this is obviously an 8 out of 10 in recall reliability because this is also to do with pattern recognition and repetition over time. And then trying to tie all this together is our working memory, which is effectively trying to bank and store all these sensory inputs at the same time. And the more chaotic things are around you, the harder it's actually going to be to remember anything about this whiskey. So for example, if you tried a whiskey at a rave or a nightclub with 1,000 people around you, your working memory is going to be battling to overcome all these other sensory inputs going on because there's too much for it to deal with. So overall recall reliability for working memory is only 6 out of 10. So if we were to boil all of that down as what we can and cannot remember about a whiskey long term, we're very good at remembering the stable information, i.e. the ABV, the stories, the history, the price. What we're not so good at remembering is what the whiskey actually tasted like. So how exactly do we overcome this problem of our long-term faulty sensory memories? Well, a really obvious answer is just to take a notepad and a pen with you to write down all your observations and sensory experiences as you have them at the time when you try the whiskey. But when it comes to actually describing a whiskey to someone else, we're not very good at this, hence why in 1984, a lady called Anne Noble invented the wine aroma wheel to help people understand and pin down the words and descriptions of what they were getting as they were nosing and tasting the wine. But if all you're doing is writing down sort of facts and information about the whiskey as you're trying it, you fall prey to the shopping list or lazy menu description problem. So let's say, for example, you walk into a bar and you pick up the menu and under cocktails, you find daiquiri and it just says rum, fresh lime juice and sugar. And then onto the whiskey page, Lafroig 10-year-old, 40% ABV from Islay. Now, what exactly are you supposed to be getting excited about here with this deconstructed fat-led appraisal of a whiskey or a cocktail? 0 points for picture painted and 0 points for effort. But if I pick up a menu, it says daiquiri, ice cold, sharp, zingy sweet, tropical slap to the taste buds. I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to order this. Now that description is obviously not how our brain stores the memory of the drink or the whiskey that we're trying, but that is effectively what you're trying to land when you convert that memory into a recommendation for someone else to get them excited. It's a bit like a car salesman trying to sell a car by saying you should buy this because it has 4 wheels, it's painted blue and has a steering wheel. Or it's a bit like trying to describe Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix as a man with an afro playing an upside down Fender Stratocaster using a Marshall amp and a wah pedal. So as much as you've overcome your long-term sensory memory issues by writing everything about the whiskey down in here, listing it as a distillery and ABV in a cask style is not going to sell it to someone else. And this is actually where, on occasion, whiskey marketing gets it right in terms of setting up expectations of what you're going to get when you try a single malt or a blended scotch. I mean, let's take this advert from the Lafroig Opinions Welcome campaign where people try Lafroig for the first time and give their honest opinions. This one, for example, says, it's like French kissing the burning blowhole of an emphysemic killer whale, but in a good way. And then on the flip side, you've got an advert like this from Spey Whiskey where a retired footballer with zero personality is telling you to shushed with zero context about what to expect from the flavour or the aroma of the whiskey. So effectively, all you have to do is start coming up with your own mini marketing terms for whiskies that you try. So taking all that information you've written down in your notebook and turn it into a little marketing slogan that's going to help you remember the flavour and the aroma of the whiskey and set up the expectations for the person that you're recommending it to. I mean, here's another example as well. One of the best ever descriptions I've heard for Craigellachie was about 7 or 8 years ago when we were up in Speyside hosting Ambassador Week and trying some Craigellachie 13 down at the Craigie Bridge just next to the Spey. And one of the American ambassadors said they were hosting a tasting back in the States and someone had actually knows Craigellachie and said, "This smells like someone just fired a shotgun through a pineapple." And to this day, I still use that descriptor when talking about Craigellachie. So overall, my top tips for experiencing and banking a whiskey to recall to make a recommendation later on are: firstly, just think about where you are when you're trying the whiskey. The more chaos going around you, the less likely you are going to remember what the whiskey actually smelled and tasted like. Always remember to take photos of the bottles and labels when you go to a tasting. Get yourself a wee notepad and pen and make all the notes when you're trying the whiskies, and then you can take it to work if you're a bartender, try the whiskies at work, and make yourself some little notes which you can then turn into your own little mini marketing terms. And then who knows, maybe after all that practice of writing amazing whiskey descriptions, you'll become a drinks writer or maybe a journalist or write your own book one day. Cheers!